Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction, tech, or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Hopefully that'll work. Okay. Well, welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh in a foggy Auckland this morning in New Zealand, and welcome to Mary. How are you?
I'm great. We're continuing to have a really fortunate summer. Weather's been great. No smoke here so far.
Well,
keeping my fingers crossed.
That's good. That is good. And also, Ilka, how are you?
I'm well. I'm in Philadelphia, and we are actually having another hot week here.
Yeah, what's it get up to in Philadelphia?
Well, it can get up to like 100. I think today it's supposed to go up to 100, and it's typically very humid, so it's not very comfortable. Yeah. Whenever my German relatives come, they actually compare to being in the zoo in the monkey house.
Right. Yeah. Well, we've got we're heading back to Canada today, I think, for a great interview that both of you, conversation that both of you had. So really excited to get into that. But before we do, we got some people to thank. So founding sponsors for Passive House Accelerator. 475 High Performance Building Supply, Bax Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minotaur All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidifier Units, Mitsubishi Electric Air Conditioning and Heating, Partel, Rockwool, Stowe and Zola, and the stakeholders partner of the Passive House Accelerator is NYSERDA, and we're all very grateful for them and our other sponsors, and also, of course, you, the audience, our listeners. Please, love to hear from you about anything interesting going on, anything you'd like to hear on the show. You can always email us, podcast@passivehouseaccelerator.com. All right. Would someone like to tell us a little bit about how did you find Jennifer in the first place?
Well, I heard her give a talk at the Passive House Canada conference earlier this summer. So, and she was clearly very well-versed in her subject matter.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to talk further with her.
Well, let's jump into it. And she's got a lot of great stuff to say. So enjoy this conversation with Jennifer Hogan, and we'll be back after the interview.
Welcome, Jennifer Hogan. She's a senior project manager and the technical and service leader for environmental performance services at Pretium Engineering. She is also the operations manager for the Burlington office and serves on the executive committee as the director of marketing and business development. That's a lot of titles and responsibilities you have there. Can you tell me how you got into envelope consulting and engineering?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came to it from kind of, I guess, an interesting place. When I was young, I had always imagined I would be an architect, probably from when I was a really small child, actually. I have an award from a project that would have been in about grade 7 or 8 that I made for myself, where we had an assignment to create an award for our future career. And it says world's greatest architect. And it's something that I still have today. So I kind of followed that passion through high school and took a lot of courses on things like drafting. I took shop classes. I got some experience in the construction industry and over the summer breaks, and realized very quickly that actually what they wanted to study architecture was an artistic portfolio of fine arts work. So in my last couple of years of high school, I kind of taught myself how to also do some of those things, enough to be able to put together a portfolio and sort of follow my dream into architecture at Ryerson University. The interesting thing about the program at Ryerson is that at the time that I was going there in particular, there's a number of different streams that you can specialize in after your first 2 years. And one of those was building sciences. And so through sort of my preliminary courses in the first couple of years, I really discovered that that was where I wanted to be. And the aha moment for me really came when we were watching a video of someone doing an investigation of an existing building, and they were essentially rappelling down the outside of the building doing that investigation. And I just looked at it and said, that's it. That's what I want to do. I want to be that person. So I ended up specializing in building sciences for the last 2 years, which ended up being sort of the perfect place for me. That sort of marrying of the world between architecture and between engineering. And I haven't looked back. I've worked in the industry since graduating.
I think that's an awesome story about the rappelling down the buildings. I think if I saw that, maybe I would have chosen your path as well. So do you actually rappel down the buildings now?
I have, yes. Yeah. So I actually did get to do that. I was trained in my first couple of years of working on a bosun's chair. And so I have in fact done that before a time or two. It's very exciting. It's a lot of fun. At this point, I leave it to some of our younger staff to take up the mantle and get to enjoy that experience themselves. But yeah, it's a really unique and interesting way to be able to look at a building and really get your hands on all of the various different components, right? Like you can poke the sealants, you can tap on brick or concrete without necessarily having to mobilize a whole contractor or construction crew there ahead of time. So,
and that's something that a drone could do, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and we definitely use drones in our business. They have a place, they have a purpose, certainly, but they don't have hands, so they can't yet. Anyways, maybe that's something for someone to work on. But they can't take that tactile experience for us, where we can actually be feeling how things feel on the wall, and doing a little bit more in-depth assessment. They can only be our sort of eyes on the wall. So there's a place for each of those, and I like to think of them as tools in our toolkit.
And going back to your building science education, were you in the minority as a woman in that specialty at Ryerson, or how did that feel? And did you feel like you got treated differently at all as a woman?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think in general, in my year in the program, there was a fairly good mix of men and women when we were sort of all more grouped together. I think certainly once we went to the sort of more technical side, the balance started to shift a little bit between how many men versus how many women were enrolled at the time. I don't know that I felt like I ever was treated any differently, though, for it. I don't know. I mean, I've been pretty lucky throughout my career. I haven't really felt like I've had many roadblocks ever because of gender or really anything else. So I've been really fortunate in that way.
It's great that you had that background in, taking shop. I mean, a lot of younger girls would have been intimidated by even the thought of taking shop. So obviously you had a lot of self-confidence already going into the field. So that's great.
Yeah, it was, I would say probably the most interesting experience I had from that perspective was that I did work on a construction site when I was about 16, and I was the only woman on the construction site, and I was 16. And so it was myself and about 50 laborers actually, working on a new home construction project. And I was mostly just there, like tidying up, helping them carry things, move things, sweeping, like really doing some of the more like menial types of tasks. But that was a really interesting environment as a 16-year-old girl. And I think some of that probably helped to build a bit of that confidence that sort of saw me through the rest of my career.
Yeah, I would think or agree that it's really important to have that experience. When I went to school in Germany, we actually had to do an internship for 4 months on a construction site. So I was probably 18 or 19 when I did that, and I was the only one as well. And it was definitely an experience, but really, really rich to just meet the people that are behind building these buildings. And I wish everyone had to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great learning experience for sure. And as someone who is called upon to potentially design things, it's very helpful to have that kind of hands-on experience where you've actually seen it going together. It just gives you that deeper understanding.
Yeah, definitely.
And sort of leaping ahead to Pretium, how did you start working there, and how long have you been there for?
Yeah, so I've been there for just over 10 years now. I had worked for a prior company for about 5 years before joining Pretium, and I had started with that company straight out of school. And I mean, it really was just a matter of having some connections within the industry. One of my mentors at the company I was working with, her husband actually worked at Pretium. And so when I had some conversations with her about, having some interest potentially in looking for new opportunities, she had kind of said, you know what, like you'd be a really great fit over there, and it's something you should explore. And so I did. I reached out to them, and fairly quickly they reached back, which was really exciting for me at the time. And we had an interview, and very shortly after the interview, just agreed generally with the person who was hiring me at the time, Dave Moore. He's our current president of Pretium, that I would be a great fit. And I agreed with him, and he agreed with me, and we very quickly put that into place, and I started shortly thereafter. So haven't looked back either.
And can you talk a little bit more about what kind of work Pretium does, like in terms of consulting, like the overarching work that you do?
Yeah, for sure. So we're a specialist building science, mechanical, and structural engineering firm. The area that I primarily work in, obviously, is the building science side of things. We do a lot of our work with existing buildings, so restoration of the existing components, helping to plan for that restoration, designing it, and then actually overseeing the work as it's carried out. We do offer some other services in new construction as well. In particular, some of the work that I do on energy performance and carbon is very much tied in with the new construction industry as well right now. So we do, a lot of everything, really. It's almost kind of hard to explain it all, but the long and short of it is obviously, like, our main thing is to keep the outside out and the inside in when we're talking about the building envelope, and just making sure that it's performing the way it should be.
And along the line, in 2018, you ended up taking the Passive House training to become a certified Passive House consultant.
Yes.
Designer.
Consultant, yeah.
Consultant. And so what inspired that?
Yeah, so that was an interesting sort of leap for us. I've always been pretty heavily involved at Pretium in our projects that we would consider sort of energy or carbon related. So we've kind of, over the years, the definition of what those types of projects means has continued to evolve. At one point, it was being involved in a lot of lead projects. Other times it's been specific to things like building code compliance with some of the recent changes to energy updates. And we had a client actually approach us and indicate that, they were really interested in Passive House in particular, in terms of actually potentially looking to get some of their buildings retrofitted in this case and certified to the EnerPHit standard. So when that opportunity sort of presented itself to us, we felt that it was a good time to kind of dive into that a little bit more deeply. And I started with taking some of the initial courses just to kind of get an understanding of what was involved. And we did some early projects partnering with some well-established companies in the industry who provide Passive House consulting services on a few projects. And from there, we just felt that it made great sense. I'm also LEED accredited, so I'm always looking for opportunities to kind of further my knowledge and education. And so I kind of said, listen, I would be interested in in pursuing this on behalf of Pretium and becoming the first person at Pretium who was certified. And so that was what we did in 2018. And since then, that group has grown. We actually have a team of about 5 of us with various different certifications, whether it's through Passive House or through Passive House US.
And then you actually started working on a pretty big Passive House project. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So the project is 255 Riverside Drive. It is a 20-story high-rise in Windsor, Ontario, and it's a social housing building. And again, this is one of the sort of early ones that we first really cut our teeth on, which is interesting for such a large size project. And we partnered with Andrew Peel and his team at Peel Passive House on this project, as well as with a mechanical engineering firm, CK Engineering, to basically conduct a feasibility study for the building and determine what it would take to take this 1970s pretty conventional kind of construction high-rise residential tower and take it to a place where it achieves the EnerPHit standard. So many years now since we initiated that project, we are slowly working our way through a stepwise approach to EnerPHit. We've completed the mechanical works for the project and are now in the phase where we're working on the building envelope. So we have overcladding and window replacement taking place this year. That project will probably stretch into 2023 before it reaches completion. And then there's a couple of additional steps that will take place once those components actually reach the end of their service life in another 10 years or so.
So that's a really interesting approach, right? The stepwise approach. And I feel like it just makes so much sense. Can you just talk a little bit more about the stepwise approach?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It makes a lot of great sense for existing buildings, in particular, because we don't necessarily want to just replace something for the sake of replacing it, right? Like, it's great to want to be more sustainable and to have a really high performance building, but it's not very sustainable to tear out perfectly good windows that are still performing and replace them with new. That doesn't really, I mean, as much as it'll improve the energy of the building, yes, it's not great for the environment to be sort of just getting rid of those perfectly good materials, especially when we start talking about carbon and embodied carbon, and the more that discussion sort of comes to the forefront. So the stepwise program allows you to put in place a plan at the outset, which is really important, and then execute it as each of those components within that plan reach the end of their service life. So you can get essentially pre-certified based on your overall plan, and then you're free to just continue executing that plan and submitting your documentation that it's been executed until you've completed all of the steps. One thing that I really like about this approach, and something that we're really trying to preach to clients right now, is that idea of the pre-planning and the thinking about the whole building at the outset. One of the things that we're finding is, we're speaking with clients who maybe replaced windows a couple of years ago or 5 years ago, sometimes even 10 years ago. And at the time, they didn't really take that holistic approach to what their plan was for the building. So maybe they said, we don't really need triple glazed windows. We'll just put in double glazed windows with argon fill. We'll use a thermal break. It's quite a bit better performance than what our original windows were. But now when they're going and looking at potentially having some of these higher targets, whether it's EnerPHit or net zero or something along those lines, they're having that buyer's remorse, where they're realizing that little bit of extra effort or little bit of extra investment in that past project that's just recently been completed would have made such a difference for them in their overall approach now, so that now they're kind of stuck waiting maybe 20 or 30 years potentially before they can actually realize the full benefits of what a holistic approach to their energy consumption would have been.
Yeah, and I feel like your approach of looking at the carbon early on is just really important for these renovations as well. I mean, you mentioned that mostly you do that for new build, but I think this is a really good guideline on determining which part of the building should be replaced and which one should be later in terms of the whole overall carbon impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And it's often something we don't necessarily model, but if we were to model it as one of the decision factors, I think you're right. It would most definitely show support for not necessarily replacing things early, right?
Yeah.
Replacing it early, if you, for example, if you had all the money in the world and you wanted to upgrade your building, of course you could take out the 5-year-old windows and replace them with something better. I mean, there's nothing necessarily to stop you from doing that. It seems like a lot of work for replacing a good, potentially good and performing item. But if you actually looked at what the environmental impact of that was on a deeper level than just, well, I'll be saving energy though. What's the impact of sending all those windows to landfill? What's the impact of manufacturing all of the new windows that you're going to bring in to replace them? So that can really help to tell that story and really help drive the process to a place where you take this step-by-step approach in a way that makes the most sense for your building and your components.
Yeah, it's almost like it should almost be incorporated into a calculator for the step approach, right? To reach that EnerPHit certification. It seems like that important.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, and something I would be curious to see if they start to move more in that direction. Again, as we start to talk more about carbon when we're talking about sustainability, I think some of those conversations and some of those discussions are still really in the early stages, and it's only just been the last few years that we've really seen that discussion start to shift. So.
And for most people, it's still quite novel to even think about developing an overall plan for your building that might stretch out 5, 10, whatever number of years. But yet, for many, many building owners, that's the only way. I mean, never mind embodied carbon on a practical financial aspect. That's the only way they're ever going to be able to afford to do it. And it's such a good point that you don't want to do something now that's going to create a problem for your overall plan that you want to achieve.
Yeah, exactly.
And you didn't mention one of the really big challenges that I know is associated with this project, which is that it's occupied, right?
It is, yes. So it's 300 units fully occupied, primarily a seniors building as well, which has its own set of sort of unique challenges, in particular with indoor environment. So as we've been finding this summer and I mean, even in the past phases, but in particular this summer with some of the heat waves that we've been having, there's challenges because we're in their space. We're potentially, limiting or removing the use of their air conditioning units while certain works are underway in particular. So there's been challenges around that. And then just the overall in general challenge, like we have been in their space at this point. I mean, this project is running on, at least 5 years from inception, but in terms of construction, like they've had a couple of pretty lengthy construction projects over the last 4 years. So, and invasive ones at that, right? This project right now, we're a little bit more on the outside of the building, obviously, with window replacements, we're still needing to be in their space. Obviously, there's balcony repairs and work that's happening on the balconies that's limiting their access to the balconies right now. But we aren't in their units quite as intensively as we were with the mechanical scope. Obviously, with that project, we were literally running new ductwork into every single unit. So there was a lot of concrete cutting. There was a lot of time in their space to run the ducts and then, build bulkheads and finish and paint and all of those kinds of things. So it's been a job in and of itself, a full-time job for at least one person, maybe even two potentially, just to be managing notices and access into those spaces and basically providing a liaison point for those residents to speak to on the client side, to help sort of navigate any of the challenges or concerns that we've been having through the project. So it's been it's a pretty unique experience. It's a very challenging project, and it has definitely required some out of the box thinking in terms of how construction gets sequenced and how to sort of minimize some of those tenant disruptions.
So, and what's really interesting about it is, how do you test for air sealing?
Yeah.
If you
And
go,
I mean, that is an interesting one. And it's a nut we're really still in the process of cracking, right? So we've done some early preliminary tests on individual units as part of a mock-up phase. Our next step is that we are going to be trying to do a whole floor test. So right now, as I said, the work is still underway. In particular, they were focusing on sort of two of the end walls on the building as a starting point. So we're just now reaching a point where we're going to have them complete the air barrier on the bottom few floors, which is easier to access than everywhere else via swing stage. And we're going to do some preliminary testing of single floors. In conjunction with Peel Passive House and with the certifier on the project, they're called Zephyr, we've had some discussions about the actual certification process for this building, and we did get approval to conduct the testing on a floor-by-floor basis. So when it comes to the actual completion of the project, that's the intention, is that each floor will be tested individually, and the results then aggregated across the entire building. It's just not feasible to have whole building air leakage testing when 300 people live there. Just the number of security guards we would need to come to the building just to, manage the fact that we have to leave all of their doors propped open and all of that kind of stuff. I don't even know if there's that many security guards in all of Windsor. So we would, you need multiple security guards potentially per floor, monitoring the fact that all of these people's doors are open and their personal property is just like out and available to anyone who walks in. You got to try to keep 300 people from coming in and out of the building, potentially for hours at a time over multiple days, depending on how the testing progresses. So it just really wasn't going to be feasible that way. I think even just the challenge of doing a whole floor where we're going to have to guard either floor above and below. So essentially when we're testing one floor, 3 floors will be impacted. That's in and of itself is a lot of people at a time to coordinate, to not be coming in and out of spaces, or using the elevators on that floor, for example. So it's going to be an interesting challenge. We're excited for it. I think there'll definitely be some really good lessons learned that I hope can be applied to future projects that are hoping to target EnerPHit of this nature. So
it really is a model, this project, in so many aspects of it, and there are so many existing buildings that are going to face these exact type of hurdles. For instance, like the balconies, you can't, it's just not practical to chop them all off and fix the thermal bridging that way, right? So you guys came up with I don't know if it's you personally, but with a great solution for dealing with the thermal bridging, reducing the thermal bridging there. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, you're right. That's the balconies is an interesting challenge. And in particular, like this building is right on the river. So there was no way we would be able to get rid of these balconies. Like the people actually use them. They enjoy them. It's kind of a key feature of this building. So removing the balconies was off the table from day one. One of the things that kind of worked in our favor in this case is that the way the doors are set up to access these balconies, there's already a raised step to enter the balcony. So on the unit side, you have a baseboard heater directly below the balcony door that you have to step over, essentially step onto as you enter the balcony onto the balcony threshold. So because we were already working with an existing step, we were able to actually build a little insulated step on the outside that mirrors the step on the inside, creating almost like actually a larger platform, a little bit better of a foot area for people to step onto the balcony. And by doing that, we were able to provide enough insulation to that detail at the floor slab to mitigate the thermal bridging to a point where we were able to achieve the requirements for EnerPHit.
That's great. Very creative. And then there was another creative solution, or at least that I was impressed by, for cooling, because that was a big issue, right?
Yeah, again, so with this building, space was at a premium, right? Like we were trying to take a set of lungs essentially and try to cram it into a building from the 1970s that had very little space. So when we were looking at our mechanical systems for the project, there wasn't really a lot of extra room to be running additional systems to supply cooling to each of these units. And so when we looked at it, they all had these existing through wall sleeves for air conditioning units. And it was actually Andrew Peel who saw a presentation, I believe in New York, about this as a theoretical idea. At the time, I don't think it had actually been applied. But by turning essentially those through wall sleeves into a sealed airtight compartment by providing a window on the interior face, so that during the winter months when the air conditioning unit is not in use, they could actually just close this Passive House certified window, and you've now got a really great thermal performance and airtightness of that plane. Whereas normally we see things like, people put a garbage bag with some duct tape over them or something like that, right? Or if you're really lucky, they've got like a little piece of like sheet metal flashing that's got some insulation glued to it that they stick on in the winter. So this detail allowed us to provide cooling, which we felt, again, like because of the population within this building and because of the changes to our climate, we felt it was really necessary to provide supplemental cooling. It allows us to provide that in a way that's relatively cost effective as compared to something like a VRF that would have to have been basically had supply piping run through the entire building.
So I actually would like to go back real quick to the air sealing question and kind of who performs what, because you're working with as basically 3 different Passive House consultant entities, and it's always interesting how everyone works together and who takes what scope. And I think it's actually really great to partner up, especially for the first project. If you're in a large project like that, if you don't have as much experience, to partner up with another Passive House consultant. But it's really interesting to see like who does what.
Yeah. So Peel Passive House are the Passive House consultants on the project. So in terms of like completing the PHPP modeling and liaising with the certifier, that's 100% them. We basically are acting at this point as sort of the prime consultant and the building envelope consultant. So we're helping to administer the contract on behalf of the clients from a construction perspective. We're completing on-site observations where we're checking for quality and making sure that things match the specifications. And sort of supporting Andrew and his team in the sense that we're providing a lot of the documentation from this part of the project. So for example, the photographs that are required to provide to the certifier throughout construction, obviously we're there 3 times a week, making sure that things are going according to the specifications. So we have plenty of documentation that we are able to then sort of share and pass along. This one is also somewhat unique because the client was fairly adamant that they wanted us to complete the airtightness testing. It is a service that we provide, and they just felt that because of the complexity of the project, they had some concerns about bringing on someone new at this point in things. So since we're able to provide that, we spoke with Andrew and we spoke with the certifiers at Zephyr and agreed that there was no concerns because the client themselves were sort of specifically requesting that we complete that task. So we're also doing the airtightness testing.
That's great. And you also did a feasibility study before you start this project, right? And we know that you actually got a award for that, and I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, we did. So the team prepared a feasibility study essentially analyzing, I think it was upward of 18 different potential retrofit options and how they would all either work together to achieve EnerPHit or not. And in many of the cases of the bundles of options that we put together, it didn't achieve EnerPHit. There were some key things that had to be a part of this project in order to make that happen. And so our report sort of walked the client through all of that different analysis that we completed in terms of what had to happen, what the costs potentially would be, what the savings would be, and really laid it out for them to say, okay, here's our top 2 sort of options that can achieve EnerPHit, what their costs are, some pros and cons for both of them. And then from there, we ended up moving forward into selecting sort of a final package of I guess, retrofits and putting them together for tendering. So I'm actually part of an association called IBEC. It's the International Institute of Building Enclosure Consultants. And they run a document competition each year where they basically request members to submit either reports or specifications or designs for projects that they have worked on. And it has to be real actual projects, like real deliverables to clients. So I decided to submit our report for consideration under the report writing category, and actually was really happy to find out that we were awarded first place. So that was pretty exciting. It meant a bit of recognition internally within IBEC. So they sort of promote that contest. They announce who the winners are and provide them their awards during an awards luncheon at their annual conference. And they also actually display all of the reports for their members to be able to review them and have a look at them and really sort of peruse and see what everybody's up to and hopefully get some good ideas from it.
Well, I hope that a lot of people got sneak peeks of that feasibility study, because it sounds super informative. But sort of going forward then, I know you're still working on the Riverside Drive project, but you've taken on some other passive house projects, haven't you?
We have, yeah. So the other one that we're working on pretty actively right now is for a maintenance yard facility for York Region. So that essentially is a building that includes sort of an office space as well as a couple of wash bays and maintenance bays for their snow removal vehicles. So it's a pretty interesting project. We are the passive house consultant for that one. And actually we've partnered with Andrew Peel again, and Peel Passive House is providing the certification for us. We're just about wrapped up with construction documents at this point. They're anticipating putting this out to tender very soon, which is really exciting for us. So a lot of the sort of initial legwork for the modeling at this point is complete, and we're just sort of fine-tuning things. Certainly this one's going to be a really interesting project. We've got 6 overhead doors, which everyone knows are an interesting challenge for a passive house from an air tightness perspective. But luckily we've got some good previous projects that we're able to sort of pull some expertise from, in particular, Andrew and his team providing some support on that from their work on the car dealership. So yeah, we're excited for that to potentially start breaking ground at some point in the very near future. And then we'll be excited to see how the air tightness testing goes, in particular for those wash bays.
And I'm excited about all the solutions that you're going to come up with, and you said are willing to share, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's interesting. Like, I would love to see each of us kind of build on these as we go forward, in particular with things like the garage doors, right? Like, there's only been a few projects that have really dealt with it. I mean, really what I'd love to see is if a manufacturer could go ahead and just make us a passive house certified garage door. That'd be great. If anyone listening wants to take that idea to the bank, that would make all of our lives quite a bit easier. But it's interesting to see, what everyone has done, and to hopefully be able to take it and apply it to your own project and tweak it a little bit. And I certainly hope that we'll be able to share some of that information as we kind of move forward in this project a little bit more, and have some things that we can potentially present and bring out to the industry as well.
Yeah, you mentioned before that you feel like that the passive house community is fairly open with sharing what they what they've developed, and are not really holding on tight to their knowledge.
Yeah, it's interesting. I find it pretty refreshing, because I think sometimes in the building sciences industry, there's a bit of a hesitation to sort of put what you're doing out there. And I'm not sure exactly where that stems from. I think it's almost kind of like we maybe think that we've got some kind of secret that makes our clients extra happy, and we don't want everyone to copy it. But I think if you work at enough companies and you speak to enough people, we're all doing a lot of the same things. And I always like to take the approach that I would rather sort of grow the pie for everyone versus growing my own slice, right? So I think if we can continue to elevate the industry as a whole, it's naturally going to create more opportunities for all of us. And there's more than enough work to go around. And I think that's one thing I've found in the passive house community that they've really kind of hit on and developed this culture of I mean, you could almost even call it like oversharing, right? Like we're all so eager to talk about our projects and talk about these unique details we've come up with. And then, you hear something at a conference and you go, oh, that might work in my project. And you take it and you obviously like massage it and fiddle with it because you've got to make it apply to your own situation. But there's a lot of that happening. And I think part of it is because some of the things that we're doing are so new and innovative. And it's great to see. I think it's great.
So you're not working on any like slam dunk easy projects, huh?
It's funny. I always joke. I'm like, man, I wish I just had like a concrete garage repair project.
All right. And that was Jennifer Hogan of Pretium, and she's project principal and operations manager there, and obviously very busy and very experienced from everything from abseiling down buildings to now doing lots of consulting on passive house projects. Ilka, let's start with you. What stood out for you from your conversation?
Well, I just thought you could hear how excited she was about the work that she's doing, and how I feel like that really carries, or it seemed like it carried over into even her workplace. And she was talking to us about like how many women are now working with her. So I feel like it's great to have this enthusiasm and creating this workspace that is just great and safe for everyone. And of course, I was very intrigued by her telling us stories about rappelling down buildings.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because you had that experience as well of hands-on working on a building site in your training, and it must be so valuable to have that understanding, even if you are just moving things around and cleaning, but just being on a building site, understanding how a building site works must be very valuable.
Yeah, I do think that it's very valuable, and I still just can remember the smell of concrete from being on this construction site. So I think it's a multi-sensory experience that you have, and that carries over in everything you do.
Yeah, definitely. Mary, what about you? What stood out?
Well, just from the very beginning, that she was so young when she knew what she wanted to do. I love the story about, that they had to make an award for themselves in the future, and she made her award for the world's greatest architect. So she knew she was interested in buildings from the very beginning. And also just, not only did she know what career she wanted to be in, but even that she was confident about being in that career. It just seemed like she had no hesitation at all, which I just loved hearing.
Yeah. And always interesting to find out how people come across passive house, because that wasn't part of her early career, but then got to hear about it and asked to create a project around that, and quite a challenging one by the sound of it. And it's not an easy thing to move an organization, move a consultancy in that direction if they've formed to provide a certain service. And being the first person to do passive house training in an organization is not necessarily easy. Obviously she had support of colleagues and directors there, but not always an easy thing to be first, but obviously it's paid off, and they're doing some great work. Obviously lots of learning with that project, and it's great hearing more about these retrofit buildings and social housing as well, because it's such an important such an important area. We've got a lot of buildings that exist that need upgrading, and to do that upgrade while people are still in the buildings, massively challenging. What did you both think about the challenges involved in doing that while people still live there?
Well, yeah, I mean, that is such a huge challenge and such a common challenge, right?
Yeah.
Because how many times you're going to have empty buildings of that size? It's just very rare. I mean, occasionally, yeah, sure, there's such bad, safety problems in a building that they have to be, the residents have to move out. But it's what I love is that she's this project is such a leading example of having people be in the building and doing all the work.
Yeah.
And the having a full-time job to be managing notices and access to get the work done. Yeah. There were just so many ways in which this project is a leader, this stepwise approach. I mean, come on, it's so practical for so many building owners to approach a retrofit that way. I think it's great, a great example in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so for the people that haven't come across that before, that essentially means doing a project over a longer period of time. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think the way it works is that you actually pre-certify it under, you energy model it and you pre-certify it, but then you have many years to actually fulfill those steps until at the end you did it all and then you can fully certify. That's how I understand it.
Right. And it's just a practical from both getting work done and the financial aspect. I think for a lot of even single home owners, that's going to be practical. And the important part about that is, as Ilka said, whether you're certifying or not, coming up with a comprehensive plan that's going to be implemented step by step.
Yeah. Like you say, I can relate to that. If I think about my own home, there's no way I'd be able to do all in one go financially, but also it obviously involves a sense of ownership or someone who has ownership over the building over a period of time, rather than just creating a project, selling it, moving on to the next one. Someone who's going to be retaining that asset or managing that asset over a long period of time. And Jennifer also alluded to the potential to think about existing materials and elements over a longer period of time and do a bit of an analysis of at what point is something worth replacing, even if it's not, or keeping it for a while, even if it's not optimum. And I think, as she alluded to, there's a lot of potential to do some pretty sophisticated analyses now, looking at not just the financial aspect of that, but also carbon and energy use over the life of individual components of a building as well as a whole building.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too, when she talked about the windows, that it wasn't really worth replacing them right now because they had just been replaced. So it's actually better, even from the embodied carbon perspective, to wait until you have to replace them and not just do it all at once. So I thought that was really, really interesting.
I have to laugh when people are considering that jump from double glazing and wishing they'd put triple glazing in the first place. Sitting in my room here in my single glazed windows, and still some of the market here is struggling to get their heads around half decent double glazing. So it would be nice to be at that next stage. Do you think? Do either of you think that we overshare in passive house world?
I don't think we overshare. You can take as much as you want.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's great that people are open with sharing what they find out. And I think I would totally agree with what she's observed, that everyone is typically very happy to share. And it's so important because then you can be better and build upon what the previous person did. And we're all following the same goals, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love what she said about growing the pie for everyone versus just for one company. And, honestly, there's plenty of work to go around. So sharing the expertise helps all of us.
Absolutely.
And I think part of that sharing, she mentioned that she won, or we knew that she won this competition for this feasibility study document. And I feel like that's such a great way of sharing even a document like that, because we all struggle with coming up, ways to organize what we need to do, or what needs to get done. And by entering this competition, there is their document became an example that is that others can follow.
Yeah definitely. Very good. Any closing thoughts from you, Mary?
No, but I'm excited to see what other projects they're working on.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to see that she collaborated with Peel Passive House Consulting on their first really large passive house project as the consultants, but now they're becoming the consultants on their next projects. And it's exciting to see that progression, as well as you mentioned, that, they've expanded the number of people certified in the firm. So that's great.
Very good. All right. Hey, well, thank you. Another great, insightful and inspiring interview. Thank you for reaching out to Jennifer and bringing us her insight. So awesome stuff. We will have another great chat to bring you next week. And I think Zach is back from his holiday next week, so he'll be joining us then. In the meantime, there is a lot going on. I'm not going to run through all the events because I don't have them on hand, but the best place to find them is on the Passive House Accelerator website. And if you haven't already, then you can sign up for the newsletter so that you always get updates on regular weekly events.
We won't be doing any Passive House live events in the month of August. Remember?
Oh, true. Yes. Summer holidays. There's a whole catalog of great videos that people can catch up on. So they can use that time while they're relaxing to catch up on some really great content there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I keep forgetting while I'm in the middle of winter here, you're going on summer holiday. Enjoy. All right. Thank you, Mary and Ilka. Hopefully we'll see you in a few weeks' time.